think we have a very interesting sort of we have two interesting approaches to seemingly similar problems in terms of how do we deal with urban development, and I'd like to propose that if you guys agree that we use them to bring out the potential dilemmas involved in dealing with problems of our city, with the problem of who is to decide. Is it a top-down approach that is healthier because of the uniformity, because of the potentials for equitable distribution of the city's resources and facilities and so forth, or is a bottom-up approach more plausible, especially in countries like ours, South Africa, where there is a question mark about the degree of control that the state has, and whether a bottom-up approach is actually detrimental to eventual state control by reinforcing and strengthening parallel structures that more or less maintain the destabilization of states. Or like in the South African example, where there is a client who is very much like the state, but because they own this big stretch of land, and whether their notion, because there is a client in this case, the designer is actually contributing to the other direction, which is strengthening the states or the clients, the strong stakeholders' control over how the city grows. And one will have to wonder if we oppose the two images of the final images of the South African example of the city, and how sort of clean and refined it is, and oppose it to that other street in Qom al-Ahmar. And one will have to wonder, okay, which world are we going to? Which world do we prefer in this setting that we are in? And what role do we as designers want to play in that? And is there a way out of this dilemma, or is there, as maybe the theoretical framework that Orhan was suggesting, there's a sort of a middle layer that can utilize some of the advantages of the top-down sort of benefits and the bottom-up approaches and intermix these outputs or not. I find this actually a very, very intriguing discussion. I mean, I can, and I think I can. I don't know if we can come up with answers, but I'm proposing that we problematize these issues, and maybe get you involved in that discussion and see where we can go from there. I think the two models, had within them extremely interesting approaches to specific problems that we can utilize or understand. But there's one question I want to ask you. Was the land empty? The beginning approach?
Yes, in answering your question, yes, the land was largely empty. It has no residential development on it at all. It currently is just a train station. And if I may, can I take the opportunity to engage with some of the things that you said? First off, thanks to my colleagues, I think it was a fantastic presentation. I worked a lot. I think the question that you've raised is spot on. And I'll tell you why it's such an important question, because when we had that discussion with the client about the financial model for this project and who would reside there and who would live there, the client was quite adamant that they own the whole rail corridor, if you will. So in this particular portion of the city where the land value is highest, they wanted to target upper to middle class people. So we had a very long existential argument about the ghettoization of the transport corridor, where certain sections of the corridor are for elites and other sections are for poorer people. I made the case that philosophically I would like to see an inversion of that sort of scenario, particularly because we didn't have a constituency to engage it from a public participation perspective. The adjoining land next to us was owned by the ports, so that was a railway, that's a port authority. The other piece of land was empty, with forced removals. The only other participant was the city of Cape Town and about 400 informal traders. So it was also very challenging to say who is the client. In my mind, the client is society, but society was not in that room, and I couldn't sketch and draw with them. I had a state client, what we call a parastatal client, who had to be convinced that their needs are served by thinking about broader sorts of issues. So your observation is absolutely correct, and the site is empty. I mean, this is part of the problem of the CBD of Cape Town, is that it has such low densities, and the people who are there are very comfortable because they are, they have access to services, infrastructure, etc. There's no need for a project of this sort of nature which will try and bring in different class groups in their mind. In their mind. I'm not saying it answers the question or justifies the issue. I think it's important to give the context around which, I would have loved to have developed some of these ideas with end users, but it was almost impossible. Almost impossible.
I would like to open up the discussion if anyone has any comments on the
project. Did you reach it, or is there any chance that you're going to reach it and to integrate them, or?
I'll explain the process that we had. First off, the way that we were commissioned was through a public tender. So there was an announcement of the project at a national level, and there were a number of companies that bid for it. When we won it, we had a public participation professional who engaged with the whole city in theory. In other words, you put the posters out, you go out to the neighborhoods, we were on radio, we discussed the project. But in South Africa, there's a difference between what you'd call interested versus affected stakeholders. So it's interested versus affected stakeholders. So obviously, everybody's interested. Who is affected is the other landowners.
Coca-Cola came from bottom up, and with you it was the railway. Would it be possible in the future that this commercial layer might play a more linking factor in the whole process or not? And I was wondering how the local initiatives got into touch with this commercial with the money, because that's rare or not? Is it usually first they meet I don't know, NGOs, and then so it's more questions than.
Yeah, starting by the second question, actually, in large corporates, there's this sector which is called corporate social responsibility, which is a responsibility for big corporates to, So that's what happens. They just finished working in Dahab Island, but the thing that And then they accessed Qom al-Ahmar because one of the people living in Qom al-Ahmar is working in Coca-Cola, so he told them, okay, we have this area you can work with. And actually, the people themselves there, they saw the product of Dahab Island, and that's why they wanted another approach of or another project that must be delivered to Coca-Cola, saying that that's what we want, not something from your own, because what's happening in Dahab Island wasn't effective enough. For the commercial spine or commercial approach of what, how will it develop? I think that's what's happening already in most of the areas, even informal or formal. Now what's making the city grow? It's just generating lines of commercial activities, and the city will regenerate itself, and old spines, they die, therefore they shift blood and then they shift claim, and so like what happens in downtown, for example. There was a certain claim for a certain group, and then they shifted the claim, and then the whole blood was shifted again. So in this project, I won't be saying that yes, we know how this will develop in the commercial aspect, especially, but as for a spine, for a main spine like this, and it's the catalyst for development all around this spine. So with it, we believe that yes, this spine will continue growing and putting commercial activities on this spine, which is the most important and has the center of the village, what will keep on generating itself.
I just wanted to comment, because I think it's, as we were speaking and looking at the presentations, I wanted to also highlight a big difference between South Africa and Egypt, or certainly should I say Cape Town. Cape Town has a very, very strong state apparatus. I think it's an important thing to clarify that. It's strong in terms of its internal governance, it's strong in terms of compliance. That is their political narrative. That is how they gain votes, because they say that we are the lawful part of the province, the rest of the country is wild and free. And what that means is that it is almost, I cannot think of any bottom-up developmental projects that have emerged in Cape Town, because essentially those projects would be seen as a threat to the state, because it would allow ordinary people to articulate their vision. So what normally happens in Cape Town is that the developmental vision is framed by either the city or the railways, and they ask the people, what do you think of the vision? So I'm just trying to, I think it's an important distinction. This is not the case, it's not the case of where you could go to a community, develop a vision, and then go to the local authority and say, the people like this, what do you think? In fact, the opposite would be told. You'd be told, no, we haven't budgeted for it. We're not interested, it's not in line with our vision, it's not in line with our planning, so thank you very much. And I think that's something which I would like to discuss, because there's been some of the subtext of walking around, and people have spoken about a sort of stateless Egypt and so on, and in some ways I think that's useful. I think it's sometimes problematic to have a state that's omnipresent and everywhere and very well organized. Sometimes a little bit of chaos allows the bottom up to emerge and to be stronger. And it's a comment, maybe it's a question actually, whether there's any residents there. I actually wish that the Cape Town powers that be were a little bit less control freaks. I think it would allow for a more bottom up approach.
I will just start from what you have just mentioned right now. I believe we have a problem with the bottom-up definition, particularly in Egypt. And let me first thank you for your presentation. أنا بس عايز أبدأ كمان the same way that you have made your presentation. إحنا عندنا مشكلة بين جنوب أفريقيا ليه؟ إن إحنا ناخد مثل في جنوب أفريقيا وبين إن إحنا ناخد مثل في
Can you
القاهرة.
just
تفتح
wait?
بس
Can you just
المايك
wait
عشان
until we fix the... No, we don't get the translation.
Sorry.
They don't get the
We
translation.
don't get the translation.
alright,
Just
sorry.
online.
Alright.
Thank you.
المثل الحقيقة إن إحنا ناخد ما بين جنوب أفريقيا وبين القاهرة يوضح قوي إن هو كان لسه بيقوله bottom up approach لازم يكون فيها مؤسسة بتحكي السبيشال بلاننج أو strategic planning overall. However هنوصل للتحلل في التخطيط زي ما احنا بنعمل كده. أنا بأثمن جدا التجربة اللي بتعمل. إنما أنا أخشى إن إحنا بعد فترة هنصاب بالأحد. لأن أنا كنت مريت بتجربة اللي أنتم مريتوا بيها يمكن على ليفل أعلى شوية، كان بنتكلم على strategic planning وبنتكلم على برنامج لحد من المرشحين في الرئاسة. بعدين اكتشفنا إن إحنا ما عندناش institutional framework يحمي البطل، لأن في الآخر الحكومة شغالة في حاجات والهيئات المخططة وبنتكلم على الهيئات الشمالية في اتجاه تاني خالص. والمبادرات اللي من النوع ده أنا آسف غالبا ما بتنتهي بأن هي ما بتحققش المطلوب لكذا سبب. أولا أنت ما عندكش وسائل ولا أدوات that assure the sustainability of urban reforms. يعني باختصار المحطة اللي احنا شايفينها دي محطة الأتوبيس، لما يجي حد بعد ما تتبني ويعمل تحتها نصبة قهوة وشاي الموضوع انتهى، مفيش حكومة بتاعته، مفيش عندك ال secure ان دي تقدر تشتغل في محطة أتوبيس لمدة 10 سنين. في مشروعات الحقيقة بحكم ان انا بشتغل في الوزارة الهابيتات ابتدي اشوف ان الحكومة بتشتغل في حاجات الحقيقة ملهاش اي علاقة باللي الناس عايزة. عندنا مشكلة في القاهرة، مشكلة كبيرة جدا. احنا بدينا نتكلم على كايرو 2050. مشكلة بالاساس مش في القاهرة، طبعا القاهرة عندنا كوارث، ولكن المشكلة ان احنا المبادرات بتتم على مستوى القاهرة في حين ان مشكلة القاهرة جاية من بره القاهرة، الهجرة، وده اللي طبعا خلى في حالة يرثى لها من الخدمات وعدم رعاية للأقاليم المحيطة بالقاهرة في الخدمات وفي الجوب opportunities تخلي القاهرة جاذبة جدا للسكان المحيطين. غياب دولة القانون وغياب دولة المؤسسات، وده على فكرة مش بسبب الثورة، ده من قبل الثورة. يعني قبل الثورة كان في مشروع اسمه التحزين. الحقيقة أنا مش عارف يعني التحزين، مش قادر أفهم يعني إيه إن أنت تجيب مثلا طفل عنده 10 سنين وتحطه في قالب جبس عشان ما يكبرش، وأنت ما عندكش رؤية الناس اللي كل اللي هتروح فيه. عشان كده أنا مش عايز أقول يعني تصور برضه أدي مثل يعني تصور المثل سكان الماربل أرتش وده على ناصية أكسفورد ستريت. الدور الأرضي غالي جدا as a rental يعني، والأدوار العليا لو ما هياش residential أقل بكتير. فتصور إن أنت السكان هناك قالوا إحنا عايزين نعمل محلات تحت تبقى امتداد لأكسفورد ستريت، نجيب حد يمولنا ويبقى مشروع كده زي الكوم الأحمر كانديفيدوالز، حتى لو عملوا NGO مع بعض الناس اللي ساكنه في النتيجه هتبقى ان المساله ده جنون. مين اللي هيسمح لهم بده؟ مين اللي هيسمح لهم ان هم يحولوا الاستعمالات اللي موجوده في ماربل ارتش ان هي تبقى امتداد لاكسفورد ستريت، الدنيا تبقى سايحه كده بعض؟ ايه المشكله؟ ان احنا ما عندناش. انا الحقيقه كنت حضرت اكتر من شرفت بمبادرات زي ما كنت انا بقول ان احنا بهذا الحماس محتاجين نعمل مؤسسات بعيده عن النقابه. لو ده نخش النقابه يبقى رائع، نقابه المهندسين اللي فيها وحده او يونت بيتكلم عن اداره المشروعات الكبرى، اللي هو ملوش اي علاقه بالمشروعات الكبرى، بيشتغل في مشروعات ليها علاقه بغزه وحاجه يعني. فالحقيقه ده اللي بيحصل ان يبقى عندك مؤسسه زي مثلا ان انت النهارده تعمل ريجنريشن بروجكت، فلازم في لندن او في يعني في اوكسفوردشاير في اي محافظه لازم يبقى فيه المجتمع المحلي بيبقى عنده تصور. الحقيقه التصور ده ما يقدرش هو يحطه، وما ينفعش يجيب مهندس يحطه على حسابه زي الابروتش اللي كنا بنتكلم عليه الفتره. فاللي بيحصل ان بيستعين بمؤسسه احترافيه اللي هي الار تي بي اي. فور اكزامبل يعني excuse me my experience from England because of the network يعني قعدت فتره. فبيجيب مؤسسه احترافيه اللي هي الار تي بي اي Royal Town Planning Institution، بياخد هذه الرؤيه يتاكد ان هي ابليكابل، والمشروع اللي قدمه الحكومه ده الحقيقه يتماشى او لا يتماشى. ومن هذا المنطلق يبتدي يعدل في البروجكت. خد بالك الحكومه ما تعملش هذا الابروتش او هذا المشروع عشان هي مزاجها كده، او عشان حد من المستثمرين وايفر بقى، يعني اي مرجعيه او اي ايديولوجيه عايز يعمل مفيش كلام. ولكن لازم يبقى في مؤسسه احترافيه في النص بتبقى الى حد كبير فيها نوع من الحياديه، عشان ما يبقاش اكستريملي بيتكلم كوميونتي اسبريشن، او من الناحيه الثانيه بيتكلم بزنس ابروتش. انا الحقيقه هو ده مش ده مش سؤال، ده كومنت او يعني رجاء ان لو قدرنا بهذا الحماس هنشتغل على مستوى استراتيجي اكتر. يعني قدرنا يعني لو قدرنا نقتحم والله النقابه القرار، بس انا بتصور ان في موضوع الدستور اللي بيتعمل والقوانين اللي بتتعمل، لو قدرنا نعمل مؤسسه احترافيه تتسم بالحياديه ولا يمكن لومها بان هي تغايب عنها الجزء الاحترافي او الرؤيه الاستراتيجيه اللي غالبا الحكومه ما بتكريتيسايز اي كوميونتي ان انت ما عندكش الرؤيه العامه. احنا مثلا ماسبيرو مثلا الارض غاليه جدا، فلما الناس بتقول ان انت ازاي تمشي الناس هناك ارض الناس، انت فعلا ما عندكش رؤيه. صحيح انت ما عندكش رؤيه، الارض هناك ثمنها المتر يسوى اكثر من 50,000 جنيه، ما ينفعش تعمل عليها عش، ده صحيح. انما لما يبقى عندك بقى مؤسسه احترافيه اللي هي تتسم الحياديه ديت، وده اللي انا برجو منه ان احنا نخش على ليفل تاني من الشغل، يعني ده رائع وده مجهود عظيم. انما نعمل بقى نحاول مع الناس بهذا الاهتمام. هو من ضمن طلبات الناس بوليس ستيشن، يعني احنا هنجيب كوكاكولا تو فند بوليس ستيشن، يعني دي حاجه. The other question is for the gentleman here is you had mentioned that there is a relocation for poor residents. I'm correct?
Sorry, please repeat.
There is apart from the project that you have presented to us, there is a relocation for poor residents. Am I correct?
Well, I think so, but maybe make your point and I'll respond. Yeah, or make the question, please.
Yes, it is so much appreciated if you give me more and elaborate about the funding tools for this project.
Okay.
And how can we, what is the institutional framework for the relocation of the poor residents from their places to your project? If I might correct that.
That our project is not displacing any poor people, and there's no relocation emphasis specifically in the project, but there's an adjacent piece of land next to us, which is the District 6 property. And that one is owned by the City of Cape Town, but because it falls underneath a Land Restitution Act. Which has the Kobusie or Nimaya, it is, but that's not happening.
Nothing would be as smart as what.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm just adding on what Tufin, these very precious words that he said, and yeah, and I think it's also like I believe that now the architect is like a mediator between people and the final what do they want and various parties around, and it's like a translator to just translate. And again, yes, the knowing the weight and knowing the weight of what the architect's supposed to do is the important stuff here, because as Mukena as well is saying, it's gone these days that the architect used to be perceived as a secondary god, where just create everything, and now it's more, it's just mediator from here to here. Yeah.
Do you all agree? Good. Please don't.
I don't know, I'm a little bit, I don't know, concerned because I think that the role of the architect, I don't know what role the architect played, I mean, in general way, because in the majority of time, with or without him, things will happen eventually. Whether, I mean, I don't know what percent does the built environment here in Egypt is built without an architect, but it's definitely huge. So the role of the architect here, I don't know. So what sort of role does he play here? I mean, is he really interfering and then complicating things more than it should be, or is he really interfering to facilitate things to be more developed and more, I don't know, in the right direction as he thinks it's the right direction? So I don't know, it's just a comment. And another thing I wanted to ask about the scale of the cities that you, I mean, the village of Qum al-Ahmar. I mean, I would like to know the scale of the city, like in terms of inhabitants, how many inhabitants there, as well as the Cape Town, the current and the prospective one. So, thank
you. First of all, I think now we're having here in Cairo, it's 69% of the built environment is informal, so there's no architect, and actually sometimes we take students to informal settlements so that they learn architecture from certain solutions that's been happening there, how the compacted designs and so. And yes, and looking at the informal settlements as a solution rather than a problem, because they are managing to fix and to redesign or design and redesign and to accommodate, to appropriate and reappropriate the spaces without an architect. So Qum al-Ahmar is 35,000 inhabitants. The total area, built area of the village is not known because it's continuous cross. It's still moving, but it can be perceived like just medium or just below medium scale regular village all around, which is repeated all around Egypt, especially in Delta.
I'm embarrassed to burden you with the tininess of Cape Town. As a city as a whole, it's about 3.5 million, of which I would say between 35 to 35% is informal on the periphery. The shocking part though is that the central city, which is the one that you see on TV and it's the image of Cape Town and so on, its residential component is only 70,000. Yeah. The 300,000 people use the train station daily to come in and then leave. So you have a rich elite of 70,000 people enjoying the best views, the best ambience and so on, and all these people on the periphery. But the way that the station is structured is that in order to move across the city, you have to get into Cape Town station, take another train, and then go back out. Now, I think that shows you the level of economic distortion and geographical distortion between people having access to space and how the city is structured. But I do want to answer your question. I think are architects interfering? I said, damn right they are. They need to. I think that architects care about the things that everybody else forgets about. So whether that is the spacing of trees on a boulevard, the spacing of chairs, the width of a boulevard is at 2.8 meters or 3.2. We are there to care about that stuff because sometimes people forget about that. We're there to care how frequent are the pedestrian crossings in a particular location. I think I've worked with many large-scale projects with lots of engineers and so on, and I'm often the only voice that is concerned about the quality of the environment, whereas everybody else is concerned about the quantities of the environment. How big is it? How much does it cost? And so on. So I think it's important for the architect to be the fly in the ointment, the artist in the room of savages, you know, to try and bring some humanity to what we do. And I don't think it's a bad thing, and I couch it that way because I think sometimes architects try to be taken seriously and not talk about aesthetics and quality, and so because that seemed to be ephemeral and irrelevant. I think in this world where we have all of these challenges, we need architects to stand up and be counted and not, you know, fall away and just do paintings in the corner. I think we have to make better cities. That's my philosophy. Even if it means that we get laughed at and ridiculed and told we're irrelevant and, you know, stuff doesn't work. If we don't do that, the world will be a much, much darker place, I think.
I think the problem is not with the architects as much as who the architects traditionally choose to align with. That's created this problem.
Exactly.
And that's a key issue when we mention the issues of commercialization, about the stakeholders involved and who has the money at the end of the day. Architecture has traditionally aligned itself with whoever paid, because if you're an artist, you know, you needed enough money to buy your paints and your canvases, and you made your statement. If you're an architect, you needed far more. You needed someone else to realize your dreams for you. But that has always been a problem, a dilemma with architects. Do we work for the people or the state or for the big institutions? And I think it's coming back to haunt us now in these discussions, okay? You know, we simply do not accept the fact that we don't take it lightly that 96 or 98% of the built environment here we have nothing to do with. Our influence is often detrimental because we're sort of reacting to it as opposed to being proactive and becoming part of the process effectively. I think our time.
Last comment.
You want to make a last comment? Okay.
Sorry. Thank you, moderator, for indulging me. I'm going to say something which is probably contentious because it's a very personal point of view and it's not particularly rigorous or proven. But I've often believed that the role of the architect is to focus on that which is common to everybody. So it's about the public realm, public buildings and so on. I'm not necessarily convinced that architects should be designing every single house out there. I'm not even sure that it's appropriate for us. And I think when we have these statistics that we only participate in 2%, maybe that's right. The question is it the right 2%? We should be thinking about the streets, the mosques, the churches, all of the public infrastructure which is shared by society. That is the architect's first job, I think, not doing houses for the rich or whatever. I mean, that can take care of itself. And that's been always my philosophy. That's why I do public work and my private work is very small, because I'm needed in the public sphere, not in the residential space.
Okay, I'd like on your behalf to thank our speakers for giving us a chance and opportunity to deal with such provocative and interesting discussions and for their very interesting approaches to the problem. I'm definitely going out a far more enlightened person. Because I really do think that there's a window of opportunity for us today because of the vacuum that has been created and because of the changes that are happening on the political scene. And I think that this sort of vacuum is emerging or being more visible in emerging countries like Egypt, like South Africa. And this is the window of opportunity for them to become actual contributors to the global discourse in terms of directing where things in the future should go. I think it was a remark that Mukena made in his presentation when he talked about projecting forward what sort of changes are happening on the environmental and climatic dimensions, and anticipating that and integrating it into our current views. And I think we have that opportunity now to project in these changes that are happening globally and make these originally following countries to gain some leadership in some dimension. And I think it's about how we project where we're going. So I'd like to thank them once more and to hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you.